That this is the start of a very, very long collaboration with our sports federations, our athletes, and you.
Ladies and gentlemen, my topic today will be how do we develop the next generation of athletes using current technology. So this lecture is a tribute to the sports scientists that have contributed to the development of sport in this country. Special mention to Tim Noakes, Prof. Richard Stretch. He created the blueprint for the template for cricket in this country. And the manuals that they use throughout this country was pioneers like himself and many other pioneers that's not with us today. So I tribute to those scientists that's not around, but their work continue. And my strive is to make sure that as South Africans, we pay tribute and we continue the legacy of developing health and sport in this country. So my background is that I'm an orthopedic surgeon. I did sports medicine, I did medicine, and I did orthopedic surgery through UCT. And just like the community, I come from a very, very small place. I come from Kimberley. But my dreams and aspirations have made me grow, develop, and advance to such an extent that from a small little high school, Kimberley, I developed into a sports physician, looking after the national team, became the first Black South African team doctor for the Springboks, became an orthopedic surgeon, knee surgeon. I pioneered technology in my field as a knee surgeon. I brought robotic knee surgery for Smith & Nephew in this country. And I continue to pioneer using new technology from a surgical point of view, which I use in our national athletes fixing their knees. So the point is that dreams do come true, and it doesn't matter where you come from. If you aspire, you're courageous, you can achieve anything in this world. My partners from a company point of view include numerous organizations. I do a lot of collaborative work with the Sports Trust, and we continue to develop sport in this country on a national base. I've also recently been commissioned by the African Olympic Federation, and we're building and developing technology for Olympics in Africa, not in South Africa, in Africa. So ASIC as a company is making inroads in Africa because that is my ambition, and the infrastructure and technology is utilized throughout the world. So, like my colleague over here, I've met Madiba on several occasions. And to start this, how appropriate, like Madiba stipulated, that sport is unifying, it brings us together, it speaks to the youth, it encourages them. And I had the honor and the privilege to actually live that, to see how sport unite. And how amazing is that? How great is it in one's career when you can see how sport and education empowers? It uplifts the body, it uplifts the soul, of the community. And whether it's brief, it allows all of us to put our differences aside. Isn't that magical? In the diverse country in which we live, where our learned differences that we develop throughout our lives are put aside for a very brief moment. And that's the power of sport. It's unifying. So I've lived this. I've developed the Springboks over 4 years with Jake White. 2023, we inducted us in the South African Hall of Fame for our contribution for development of sport in this country. But lessons learned. And rugby is just an example of the important lessons that I've learned as a person. And the one fundamental lesson is honor and commitment. As Jake writes in his book, that we were in a very critical time of sports development where we had to challenge the norms. Our athletes were playing too much sport. And we've devised and I've created a program for 4 years of development because our objective was to win the Rugby World Cup. That was it. Yet at one stage, Jake's career was at risk. We're in England, right? And they flew him back before we played an international match in England because they were going to fire him. I then called up Tim Noakes and I said, Tim, all our good work that we've done, you need to be vocal, you need to speak up because Jake is going to get fired. If you see value in what we've done, if you go back to the history books, you'll see Tim was vocal. End of the year tour. Why? Because the honor and the commitment and the respect that we showed as a collective was demonstrable. And yes, doesn't matter which career or fields that we're in, right? The principle in this slide is that as human beings, we need to show commitment, integrity, and honor. That's the life lessons that I've learned. And to you, Jackie, I would like to just mention Jesse Owens. He was the first person to win 4 gold medals in the field and track in the 1936 Olympics. And he stipulates that we find good, it's all around us. We find it, we showcase it, and you start believing in it. And that, to you, is just a word of thanks, because that is what we need to do, and that's the strength of South Africans. We need to find courage. We need to find the window of opportunities, no matter where desolate you may be. And that has been my personal strive for years now. I've created a self-funded entity, a company called ASIC, to develop and empower communities. Earlier, I sat there, I sent a message to one of my colleagues, and I had tears in my eyes. You know why? Because today is a day where my vision and dream of developing tools, education, where it makes a difference is here today with you guys. So where are we in technology in this country? You know what? We've developed to such an extent that we can actually test your genes to determine whether you're going to have an at-risk disorder of dying on the pitch. We can test your genes currently to determine what level of performance you may be at and what you should be consuming to optimize your performance. And in the next few months, in our interfaces, we're launching this genetic testing for sports development. That is how advanced we are in technology. But I ask you, how do we in South Africa, in the most remote areas, how do we create the next generation of world-class athletes as a collective, despite this extravagant test that is there for only select few of individuals? How do we do that? Now, I've seen the struggle in South Africa and I continue to see it. Talking about 30 years, I've been involved in sports science for the last 27 years. What are we doing for development? What meaningful contribution are we doing for our youngsters in the Overberg, I ask you that question. But what I have learned is that it is not organizations and sports institutions that are going to do this. You need to empower yourself. And that is my personal strive, is to allow empowerment. So I've created tools free of charge. I've created education on every conceivable sport that you can think of. It's available there for you guys. So my message today is free education on ASIChealth.com, free tools with an app called ASIC Performance Fingerprint for you to empower yourself. Don't be dependent on anyone else because it's not going to happen. But what is critical is that it must come from a credible source. And that is where I pride myself today. That man will tell you there, in rugby, people talk a big game. But when it comes to performance, they're nowhere to be seen. When you hit those scrums, when you have to make that tackle, where you have to dig deep in that last second half. And that's the difference between winning and losing. Then you start separating the men from the boys. So that is critical. People talk big games, but they don't deliver. So empower yourselves. That's my message today. If you take anything home, take that message. But we need to make sport safe. We need to create a safe environment. Recently, we've seen this youngster, Cornell Hendricks, die. So health in sport is a serious entity because people die on the pitch. And believe you me, I've had my share, fair share. Before we went to the Rugby World Cup Finals 2007, PSP was diagnosed with pulmonary embolism. I was in the media. I had to stand steadfast as a professional and protect that man despite the challenges internationally and locally to put that man on the pitch. But I stood my ground and I took him out. And if you go to the archives, you'll hear him be thankful for his life being saved. So the point is that sometimes in life we have to be courageous and we have to be honorable and be professional. And I've even published on the topic sudden death in sport in this journal article, and I presented to many international audiences on the topic despite being an orthopedic knee surgeon. So how do we make sports safe? Yes, it's multifactorial. There's a whole combination of various factors, but I will highlight some basic key fundamentals that I do believe in today's situation and here in the Overberg that we can do to make a difference. We are human beings. We start as youngsters, we grow, we develop. And in our athletic lifespan, it's just a small window of our entire life. Very, very small. There's life before our athletic career and there's life afterwards. That is a very small window of opportunity that exists within our life. So whatever structure you use in development, it must be all-encompassing and it must include all the medical challenges that life throws at us because our career is so small within our lifespan. And yes, we will grow and develop, okay? And we will compete at the highest level. And we're different. Each individual is different. But we compete when we're in sport and we compete at the international level. And when you look at the Olympics, we see that certain countries dominate, like the United States. Yet in South Africa, look at the statistics, 126 total overall message. Where are we? It is embarrassing. As a scientist, it is embarrassing because we have the talent, yet we don't have the basic infrastructure to develop our athletes. And there's selectivity in how we develop athletes in this country. This is embarrassing. And you know what's the saddest thing about in South Africa? We glorify defeat. We glorify isolated gold Olympic medals by select individuals that don't need any support and development. My whole life, I fought at the highest level and maintained that, and I maintained my integrity to fight for only gold. That's what Tim Noakes wrote in his article before we left for the World Cup. Some athletes go to the Olympics to participate, and some go for gold. When we went to the 2007 Rugby World Cup, we went for gold. We didn't go to participate, and that's the difference between winners and losers. We glorify athletes going getting bronze. Bullshit, man. We're there to go win gold. And when we start changing our attitude, that's when we're going to start being achievers in this world and in this country. And you know what's the saddest thing of everything? You look at America, right? Okay. Why do they do great? In the 1600s, they took our ethnic African population, they put them under the strictest, harshest conditions to go to the States. And with the theory of Darwinism, of selectivity and creating, they created a population of ethnic African American people that are elite from a genetic standpoint of view. Yet, despite saying that, you find that in some African countries in long distance running, we do well. Why? Because genetically, we are all different. That's why some individuals will go to the Olympics, they'll win gold, and they don't need any help from any organization. Why? Because they're just superior athletes. But it is our responsibilities as organizers, as scientists in my field, to make sure that we nurture those individuals to be the best that they can be. And if it means winning gold, well and good. If it means winning the derby of the weekend at the school, well and good. But it is our responsibility to empower them to be the best that they can be. Then we succeed as successful professionals. Now, youngsters must play all sports. They'll find their way and they'll naturally select the best sport that they're good at. But it is important to start at an early age, guys. We need to encourage our youngsters from an early age because the neural pathways get stimulated very, very early. If you don't stimulate it early, there's no room for success. That's why development structures and strategies must target the young, the scholars, if you want to be successful. So when you look at the general population, you'll find that within the general population, there's a select group of individuals, that's the athletic population, and they're strong, they're powerful, and within that athletic population, you find this group, they're super athletes, they're these guys. So even with a natural progression of decline over time, they're still better. So when they decline, they're still better than most of the athletics competing at the 50% percentile. That's why their careers extend for such a long period of time, because they're the super elite. So when they shift, they're still better than most competitive athletes. Now, skill development is important, and that's the infrastructure. That's why some sports is dominated by select countries. Why? Because of the infrastructure, the development tools that we need to set in place. But what makes life so difficult is that sport has become so competitive. You look at 100 meters, becoming faster. So despite the backlog in terms of infrastructure, the environment in sport is just becoming so competitive. And we're not doing even the basic fundamentals. Sad. So from my personal experience, what are the key cornerstones? Practical cornerstones. What's the fundamentals? I've just shown you. My company is launching genetic testing to help athletes at the highest level. But how do we develop Africa and South Africa. How do we start off there? When you look at the muscle system as an example, and this is basics that I'm talking on here today. The muscle allows movement, okay? But we need to nurture that muscles. We need to know what's the appropriate energy source depending on what sport we're in. We also need to make sure that those muscle groups are protected from injury. And when we do a particular sport, it's not just about doing the sport, it's about strengthening the muscle group that's appropriate for that sport. Okay? So that the neural pathways adapt accordingly. Similar like cricket, you do the right strength exercises, you follow the right protocol, and you understand it. Sport injury, inevitable. In your career as an athlete, you're always going to get a hiccup. You're always going to get an injury. Okay? It's inevitable. My biggest challenge as a sports doctor was in the World Cup in 2007 when Percy Montgomery went down with a knee injury. I had to examine him, I had to make a decision, can he continue or not? What they don't write in their books is how shit scared he was when he went down. And he said, "Doc, is my knee okay?" That was his first words. Like I told you, I alluded to Errol, some people talk a big game, some people develop. I developed a 4-year relationship with these athletes and with a coach. If I stipulated something, it was gold. Why? Because I didn't bullshit people. I was truthful. I was honest. I had players crying in my room when we were traveling because I had to send them home because I did what's right. And when you're honourable, trust comes. So when Percy went down there, okay, I told him, Percy, your knee's stable enough to continue. I instructed the physio to strap him, they strapped him, and he continued playing. And he scored that was in the 36 minutes of the first half. He continued playing, he scored all the 15 points for us winning the World Cup. So the point I'm making is that injury is inevitable. And it's how we manage those injuries that's going to allow us to continue to persevere. Not only in the World Cup winning match, but throughout our careers. Now, I told you I've been involved in sports for the last 27 years. I've seen great athletes fall along the wayside. And Gum, I don't know if you guys remember Gum, he was a fastball cricketer, great cricketer. His career was ruined because he had multiple stress fractures in his back. And you know what the sad thing is? Could have been prevented. If you did the right preventative exercise routine for cricket, could have prevented that injury. Sad. Look at Wayne van Niekerk, his career was ended because he had an ACL on a promotional match. So injuries ruin careers. If it's not correctly diagnosed, if it's not appropriately treated, it ruins careers. And you know the sad thing about it? Now the other day I operated on a kid. They got a scholarship. Poor kid, had a scholarship. I operated because I do part-time state work on his knee. And I used his father's hamstring to put in his knee to fix his knee. But that poor kid, that scholarship allowed that entire family to sustain themselves economically. But that's the reality that we live in this country. And when we have blinkers and we don't see that, we are ignorant and blind to understand the ramifications of poverty and how sport can uplift individuals at every single level. And I say that because I worked at the highest level and I used to see underprivileged kids running around with dirty bandages. And nothing has changed in this country today still. So the point I'm making is that just like in gum, every sport will have a specific load of injuries. Every sport. We know that. We scientists, we know that. Okay? But what you have to do is that you have to do preventative exercises. So I've created Asset Performance Fingerprint app. On that app, all the preventative exercise routines for all the common sports is there free of charge to prevent you from developing those common injuries that you will encounter, whether it's soccer, rugby, cricket, you name it. So primary health care starts from the basics, preventative care. Here's an example of golf. Loads the spine, loads the shoulders. You're going to have disc-related problems. You're going to have shoulder impingement. Here's the program. You do it every week. It will prevent those particular injuries from happening. Not 100% guarantee, but you stand a better chance of not doing it from a preventative point of view. Basic injury management. If you have an acute injury, do the basics: rest, ice, compression, elevation. But more importantly, it's not just your acute management, correct diagnosis. How often don't we hear of youngsters falling along the way with basic injuries? Do you ever ask yourself why? Not in today's day and age. I fix knees so that guys play at the highest level. I fix most of our national athletes. I fix and they go back to playing sport at the highest level. So the point I'm making is that no one should be deterred from performing maximally for an injury. This is a bucket handle meniscus tear. That's how you should fix it. And when you have a complex tear like a root tear in the knee, that is how you fix it. So even from a surgical point of view, when you have a surgical problem, whether it's a spine, hip, knee, it's not just surgery, but it's the appropriate surgery that's important. So whether it's a non-surgical or surgical problem, you need fixation. And you can go back to the highest level of play. Why? Because I know that. You have no idea how many national Springbok players have had a catastrophic knee injury that have reconstructed, that have gone back to the competitive level. So yes, injury shouldn't be an excuse not to continue persevering at the highest level. And unfortunately, at times I have to do meniscal transplant when there's botched cases. But the next point is very critical. There's life after sport, people. You can have the most perfect ACL reconstruction in your knee, right? You're going to end up with arthritis. 40 to 60% you're going to end up with arthritis, irrespective, no matter how great your surgeon was. That's exactly. And what did I say? Your career as a sport is such a small, limited space. And the point I'm trying to make is that your continuity of management should extend beyond your sports career. That's the point. And that is what makes my infrastructure and my drive so different. Because I can accommodate and we accommodate. So the same like we have preventative routines for sport, we have preventative routines to maintain better quality, whether you have knee arthritis, hip arthritis, you name it. You can have your surgery and you can still do your rehab on our interfaces, and you can track all your medical conditions on our interfaces. And unfortunately, an individual over 35 that dies suddenly on the pitch because of coronary artery disease. So the point I'm making is that our longevity of our activity level will still continue, not at the same competitive level, But in terms of quality of life, we still need to be active participants in sport, but we need to be cognizant of how to manage ourselves. And science is not magical. Science is actually very simple. It's just understanding. But if you don't understand the physiological parameters, how do you know whether you're improving or deteriorating in function? How do you know that? And that is why testing is so important. And the testing you can do on your own. And you can track it. So that when things do change, you know what's happening. Now, can I give you another example? Internationally, so many athletes will die because of a condition called commotion cordis. I've seen it in rugby. I've reviewed a case in rugby where I saw this happening. Even our first aid must be sport specific. Because they don't teach you this in first aid, commotion cordis. Does anyone know what commotion cordis is? But we're all involved in sport. Commotion cordis is a condition where you're throwing balls around, right? That's very, very rare, this condition. You throw a ball, low impact, not high impact, the highest incidence is in baseball. You throw a ball in your chest, but if it occurs at a very critical time in your cardiac cycle, you go into ventricular fibrillation and you die. And one author by the name of Marin wrote a lot on these articles and showed that if people are not ignorant and they understand these basic conditions, you save lives. Because a cardiac pump and defibrillation makes a world difference. So even first aid, that you think you get a little paper that says, listen, you've completed, has no validity if it's not sport specific. That's why I've created a whole specific, sport specific first aid module. Because I can challenge you. You go to all your first aiders, right? And you ask them, do they know commotion cordis? They're on the sports pitch. What values that? So sport specificity in what you do save lives, even if you're healthy. But no one tells you this or teaches you this. And then sadly, sport allows every youngster an opportunity to look at the world differently. It gives youngsters to aspire to become better individuals, to develop their skill. And it doesn't matter whether that youngster plays for the Olympic team or not. It's a culture. Sport is a culture that allows the mindset to develop them not just physically but mentally as well. That's why so many organizations use athletes for their commercial value proposition. Why? Because that's the power of what sport has. And that's why we are so privileged to be the custodians of developing these youngsters. Because it might not make that individual develop, but like the previous case, the youngster that got a scholarship, the difference of staying in the ghettos and getting out of the ghettos. And that is what we need in this country. We need empowerment, economic empowerment. And sport is one route that we can do that. But we are so far behind. That's a sad thing. This young man, don't know if you guys, anyone know him? Right? You know that guy? Solly Tebalika. I treated that young man when I was at the Greek course. You know where's Solly today? He was murdered in his shack in Caledon, and he played for the national team. Right? So the point and the challenges that we have in this country is that it's not just about developing athletes, it's about developing individuals, developing tools so that they still have a volition of the sport, and that's what we lack in this country. So to summarize, what's important is that science is not magic. We need to understand our performance parameters. Why? So that we can document and understand whether we progress or whether we regress. When we have injuries, it's important to correctly diagnose it, and more importantly, to prevent it from the first phase of preventative care. That is what we need to do. So that when there's a change in our analysis, when the change is to a dip and we monitor it, we know the red flag should go up so that we can create positive change. And we can do inclusion. This is an ACL, there's an acute tear, there's the reconstruction, that's a chronic tear. I don't want to see this. I want to fix it when it's there. Why? Because the nerve fibers in your accuracy of your reconstruction must be so perfect that those nerve fibers must incorporate into your graft. Why? So that the brain still have nerve tissue to tell the knee how to protect itself, and it's not just relying on the graft. But it has to be pinpoint accurate when you do a reconstructive surgery procedure. And all of us, our responsibility is, no matter what youngsters are involved in any sport, we need to make sure that their performance is optimal. Whether it means going to the Olympic or the local derby, doesn't matter. Jackie, so when we find the good in the people that surround us, no matter where we are, okay, it's our responsibility to nurture them, no matter what your constraints may be. Okay? And we create that belief system. Okay? But when we take that seedlings, we need to support them with a validated approach. And when we're lucky and we succeed, not all of us, but some of us will have the privilege of obtaining gold and see the value of what that brings to us as individuals, but as a community and as a nation. That is what we see. And if we have more events like this, God forbid what a great country we'll live in. So on a personal note, it's my strive to continue creating a leading institute for the best scientists in the world, contribute to the development of sport and health in this country. And it's my personal mandate to make sure that the basics of education and tools is really available. Whether I do it sole alone, coming here, or wherever I will continue, because that is my personal strive, whether I have support from any organization or not. And that is my message to you guys, is to empower yourself, because no one else is going to do it for you. So I thank you for your attention.
So again,